somebody posts, should I read LessWrong wiki or not? And then says like, yeah, I recently discovered it because of Roko's Basilisk, actually.
Ew.
So like, what's going on there? Like, should I read it? Is it good? And then the first answer here says, I read through a bunch of it some years ago because I had heard some of my students mention it and wanted to see what the fuss was about. The main problems I could find were the following, and each one of these problems listed has a whole description, but I'm just going to read the bullet points. 1, reinventing the wheel. 2.
See, that's what happens when you don't engage with what... Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
Welcome back to Cult or Just Weird. I'm Chris. I'm a game designer and data scientist.
I'm Kayla. I have so many biases.
So
many biases. I'm
I
biased and irrational.
I am incredibly biased and irrational.
That was one of the reviews we've gotten on...
No, it was irresponsible and biased.
Oh, it wasn't irrational. Okay, well, in addition to being irresponsible and biased, we are also irrational.
Irresponsible and biased.
If you want to support those 3 things about this show, you can by going to patreon.com/culturejustweird. And
you can pay us for our irrationality.
If you want to talk about how irresponsible we are, join us on our Discord. That is linked in the show notes.
So, Kayla, this is probably the hardest question I've ever asked you at the top of a Cult or Just Weird episode. But I need you to think of just one of the wonderful things about me that you like. I know it's going to be a challenge to think of just one, but try. And here, I'll give you some help. I've heard you say before that you really like how I like to think about things really carefully.
That's my favorite thing.
And like, all joking aside, that's not just something that you like about me. That's something I like about you too.
Oh, I don't do it the same way you do.
Well, that's why you're irresponsible and biased.
Yeah.
So, but what if I told you that there was a whole community of internet denizens that was dedicated to precisely that sort of thing?
I believe they're called netizens.
And what if I told you that it was the same community that we are currently comparing to a cult because of how inside baseball their jargon is and how they have a set of scriptures written by a charismatic leader?
Are you saying that thinking is a cult activity? That sounds like something a cult would say.
Well, we are a cult.
I don't know how to feel anymore.
It's okay. Good. Because now you know how I have been feeling. And you mentioned this last episode. But yeah, you already know that I've been like really disoriented because I've been like venting and fuming all week about how disoriented all this research has made me feel. But now I want to vent and fume on the podcast. I don't know what the hell is going on. I can't decide whether I like LessWrong
or with just LessWrong.
In anything, but also in particular right now, LessWrong. I can't decide whether it's just like a doomsday cult or whether it's something I like.
I mean, do we want to get into this here? But like, you and I have been talking a little bit the last little bit about how the singularitarians and like some of these guys like echo millenarian
beliefs, yeah.
Echo millenarian beliefs, echo like trying to bring about or like wanting the end times to occur because the end times will signal the death of the bad and the birth of the good.
Absolutely. And we will get to that. Singularitarianism, which I believe is the correct ism to refer to singularitarians, is a huge overlap with this community, which we will get to. But right now I'm just like, I want to talk about how, I don't know, like I was...
You just want to gab? You just want to like...
I just want to gab.
You want to sit crooked and talk straight?
Yeah, exactly. Like when I was doing this research, I was like all ready to be like, all right, let's see what these dipshits are about. You know, because I had my same biases you do about like Eliezer and like his dumbass quotes, because those are the things that rise to the surface, blah, blah, blah. And like as I was reading more of the posts, I was like, I don't know, this... Like, I hate to use this words, but like, I was like, man, these are kind of my people a little bit.
Right,
like,
right. It's like being a Rick and Morty fan.
Yeah. Yeah. Like they kind of like, I like arguing about pedantic stuff just to think about it.
Right.
You know, I like arguing about like strange hypotheticals and like stuff where like a lot of people will be like, that doesn't apply to real life. What the hell is wrong with you?
We once had an 8-hour conversation with friends about what ontologically makes up a sandwich.
Yes.
So,
exactly. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's that kind of stuff, like, but on a website with a lot of people. And I was like, as I was reading this, I was like, man, I really like that actually.
Yeah.
And like, for the most part, there are good comment sections on the internet and there are bad comment sections on the internet. And like this comment section, like felt pretty decent to me. Like everybody was kind of like respectful, even though they disagreed. And
That's
like,
so nice.
Because they kind of like, it's kind of built in. Like we're supposed to disagree. Like we're supposed to be like challenging each other's like biases and stuff. Now that doesn't always happen, but for the most part, it seemed like posts and comments on those posts were now total circle jerk because they always linked to all stuff around their own. So there's totaltvtropes.com. But for the most part, I don't know, nobody was like calling each other an idiot or being like, this is stupid libtard stuff.
That's very refreshing.
Yeah, like I kind of liked it.
I know. That sounds really nice.
So I don't know. Like, I don't know how
Can I ask you a question?
Approach this, but yeah, you totally can.
So
I have a pros and cons list.
Nice. Okay, I want to hear the pros and cons. Nice is not on the same like spectrum as good and bad. So nice is great. Prefer nice. And also
kind of is.
Nice is a different thing because you can be extremely nice and polite while being like a racist bigot.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And so my question here is the style of communication polite and also there's room for racism and bigotry, or is the style of communication polite and it is also a welcoming atmosphere to marginalized populations?
So I think that this is the type of community
and I don't know either way. I'm truly asking.
No, I know. Yeah. I think this is the type of community that I think any community can definitely have some of that stuff creep in. I think this community, some of that like bad stuff creep in. I think this community is maybe a little more prone than like average because they definitely have like a
more prone,
like a laissez-faire, more prone to having like bad ideas, bad actors, shitty people creep in. I think they are more prone to that because of the sort of like, you know, veneer of, well, we're just all talking about rationalism stuff and I'm not going to critique you for something I disagree with. So somebody can come in and be like, hello, here's some racist things. And like, it's not really encouraged to like shun someone like that. It's more encouraged to like engage with that person. And like, you know, they're more pro debate than they are pro deplatforming, if that makes sense.
Which is again, like, I don't know if that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
I just mean more like it's possible to have an extremely polite conversation about like whether or not certain queer people should like, be able to exist in society.
Totally. Yeah. So I think it's more like what I was just saying, where it's like, I don't think the majority of them have that view themselves, but you're going to find it a little more difficult to combat if you're not willing to curate as part of your sort of overall steez, which they've kind of had some of that problem, which we'll get to a little bit, but for the most part, for the most part, I don't find it to be, I didn't find it to be a community that was like, we are very polite. We're like polite owners of a plantation. Like I didn't get that impression. I got more of like, we are always trying to engage in good faith, and sometimes that can bite you in the ass. I know.
I think that's a really, in certain arenas, like that is the way to operate.
I know.
Not in all arenas necessarily, but in certain arenas, acting as if everyone is engaging in good faith is like very important. But yeah, you're going to get fucked by people who aren't engaging in good faith. Yeah,
I think that they had a little bit of like security by obscurity that like something like Twitter wouldn't have with that, right? Like you're not really going to find yourself on LessWrong unless you give a shit and you were like read about it somewhere else.
Right.
Whereas like cross population sample in Twitter is going to have X% that are like deplorable idiots. And
ballsy of you to use that word.
Maybe so. You know, Hillary's my gal. I'm
with her.
You're totally derailing me, Kayla.
Sorry.
That's right. This is the derail episode of this. Like, but yeah, no, there's going to be a percentage of folks on a site like Twitter that are just going to suck, and so you have to curate more on a site like that. Right. You can kind of get away with it more on a site like LessWrong, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't create problems, which we will get to.
Bodybuilding.com.
So yeah, that's another great example. We should definitely do that for the show at some point. All right, let's get to pros and cons. Let's get to the good and bad. This is probably not comprehensive, but I just kind of wanted to like lay it all out in front of me.
Now, is this a rational pros and cons list, or is this an irrational pros
I
and cons
wrote it,
list?
so it is
Extremely irrational.
extremely pristinely rational, and it cannot be challenged because otherwise you're just being illogical.
I need to adjust.
You need to adjust your thinking or your chair.
My whole body is asleep. Lay it on me.
All right, so the first, and like this is obvious because we've already talked about this a lot, but the whole challenging bias thing, right? Like that's what they're all about. And
Wait, is this a pro or a con?
That's this. We're starting with the good.
Okay.
We can go back and forth, but the way I have it written here is we'll talk about the good, then we'll talk about the bad. So anyway, I think the whole challenging bias thing is pretty good. I like that. That's something that, you know, that's why we sort of let off today's episode with like, I like to think about stuff because like that's what they do, and I really like it. You know, I enjoy the same sort of like, oh yeah, that is a bias. Interesting. Okay, now how can I combat that? Like,
and I like having my biases like pointed out to me. Not like pointedly. I don't want someone to walk up to me and be like, hello, you just did a bias. But I like having those styles of thinking pointed out to me. I like my pitfalls. I like to notice my pitfalls.
I think these
days.
Me too. I think it's fascinating. I've always liked to be like, I kind of like to be proven wrong. Like, I don't know.
Oh, you love being proven wrong. I hate it, but you love it.
Like, I know that's another bias.
That's another thing I like about you.
Me saying that means like, well, that means that all the ideas I have are correct because if it wasn't, then because I like being proven wrong, I would have been proven wrong. And so everything I have in my brain is correct.
I know, but I just
Isn't that fucked up?
Something that I really like about you is that we can engage in, like, there's a point in arguing with you. There's not a point in arguing with a lot of people necessarily, but there's a point in arguing with you.
Oh, good. So I'm basically inviting people to argue with me. That's
great.
There's
a point in arguing with you in that you engage in a debate or discussion or an argument with the possibility in your head that you could change your mind. And I think that that's a difficult thing to do, but you kind of come by that naturally. Like, we've had arguments where instead of like both of us just like digging in on the respective side, like we've changed each other's minds. And like, I think you're actually better at that than I am.
So Kayla, cis hetero white men are born with the debate gene where like we just like to debate things.
Yeah, that's different than being able to change your mind. I think that's actually the opposite. The debate gene is the thing that you guys have where you just want to like fucking argue to argue, and you can't, your minds will not be changed.
Yeah, I have that too.
You will be presented with new information, and you figure out how to like maintain your biases versus taking that new information and changing your mind.
Which again, it's a bias for me to think that I'm not that.
Yeah, I know. I shouldn't be
right.
I shouldn't be tooting your horn too much here.
I actually think that, and this is sort of riffing here, but you know, I was joking by saying like, "Oh, is this that white dude?" We're like that. But like, when you come from a position of privilege, it is easier to view things in like this sort of neutral manner. It's like you have this position of privilege where like, you know, whatever you're talking about probably doesn't affect you. Like, you're probably fine. So you can sit here and talk about it. You get to be
rational about like whether somebody should have rights versus the person who's like, I'm literally trying to fight for fucking right to exist.
Exactly. So like, you know, both of those sides of those coins like offer their own bias. Like, you know, if you're not privileged, you know, you have some sort of bias based on that. And if you're privileged, you have some bias based on that. So I think there is some truth there that like part of the privilege of being privileged is also the privilege of like having topics of discussion not affect you as much.
Right. I also think it makes you unable to have those discussions in fully rounded ways. And there's this cognitive bias of like, oh, I can be objective about it because it doesn't affect me. And you're not actually being objective about it. You still, not you, but the general you. You still have a very biased and influenced perspective on said thing because you're not a part of it.
Right. Yeah, I think it kind of cuts both ways. Back to LessWrong, they have like some pretty good insights in there too about the bias stuff. So I collated a few of them here. There's one thing that they call the happy death spiral.
I don't want you to explain that.
I know. I like when I was reading. So as is everything on TV tropes, I mean, LessWrong, like you encounter a term like several times before you ever actually like click on a link to see what the hell it is.
Right.
Otherwise you can't read things. And so like, yeah, I definitely read that like 5, 6, 7 times before I finally like read what it was. I don't know if I was disappointed or not, but like I definitely had like I wonder if that's like, I don't know, you just like go on drugs and then you just like spiral your way into death because you're just so happy from the drugs. But no, by the way, and then that's, an example of the jargonization of this website.
Right.
So what it is basically like a feedback loop from the halo effect. Have you heard of the halo effect?
The halo effect is where if you're hot, you get stuff.
It's mostly if you're hot, people think that you are better in other ways as well.
Which
so
is
like, you're smarter or more.
That's the whole thing of like, oh, that's why JFK won.
Yeah. And like,
because he didn't look sweaty in that one debate.
Yeah, that was the first debate on TV, and he was
not sweaty,
more charismatic looking man than Richard Nixon.
Yeah, Richard Nixon looked real sweaty in that one. I'm so sorry.
I think it was the sweat, which I will never become president because I'm extremely sweaty. But
that's the only reason.
The halo effect also can be like more generalized as like if one person has a property that's like awesome, like maybe that instead of being good looking, they're smart, then you're going to think that they are better in other properties. Mm-hmm. So it's not just good looking. It's also like, well, he's smart at math. So like he must also be like a good person because smart people aren't.
Oh, the Neil deGrasse Tyson problem.
Right. And then there's the domain thing. Like if you're smart at physics, then you also know about vaccine science and you also know about this and that. So what they call the happy death spiral is a feedback loop on that, where it's like, if you think something that you yourself maybe are involved in, your club is better at like you have really smart people in physics, whatever. You're also going to think they're better in other areas. And then thinking that you're better in other areas is then going to feed back to every other property about the group. So there's this feedback loop where the halo effect from one property affects all the other properties. And then those properties are biased in this way that makes those seem better, which makes everything else seem better. And there's a death spiral based on that, this like cognitive bias death spiral. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So like they have solutions for that. Like they say like you really have to be looking out for the bad stuff and not just like, accepting the good stuff. And it also helps to chop up ideas into smaller chunks for evaluation, which I thought was like pretty insightful, so like this is kind of related to like One True Cure.
We do hate gestalts on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So if you chop up like, well, this group is good at this, let's evaluate their claims about physics, but then let's evaluate their claims about this thing, and let's evaluate their effectiveness over here, then that can help you sort of combat that.
I like that.
Yeah. Another example, Eliezer Yudkowsky has a whole section in the sequences about cults and cult-like behavior. And one user there...
I think that people who are not extremely well researched and like have classic academic backgrounds, I think that they shouldn't talk about cults.
That's kind of the problem.
I was making a joke about our podcast.
Oh, man. Oh, that was real bad. All right. We're going to end here today because I feel really bad now.
Do you want to keep that in, or do you?
No, if I cut that out,
it would be really biased.
In an episode about like examining one's own biases, I think that would be like, I don't know, that's my happy death spiral. That's bad. I agree. I think that we do that. I think that
that's our entire
that's another
podcast.
What I was going to say in my like utterly blind state was this is like also an example of what does he know about cults? Like he knows about AI research and cognitive stuff.
Sure.
But it looks like it's kind of related.
I don't talk about cults because I'm really smart at anything. I talk about cults because I'm not smart at anything.
Right. And neither am I. But he does talk about cults, and there's a user in one of those, I don't know, somebody in one of those essays commented something and brought up a great point about what, like, it was essentially he was talking about our is it niche criteria. Like, obviously he didn't put it that way, but like there was this like argument of like, well, cults are just religions that haven't caught on yet, right? Like cults are just, there's no difference between like a new religious movement and an established religion other than like society accepts one or the other.
Right.
And this guy brought up a really good point, which is like, actually there are some like things that we see that feel like irrational sometimes aren't. And like when you think about something like, say, Catholicism versus a new religious movement, Catholicism has thousands of years of like, we're not going to ask you to Jim Jones yourselves.
Yeah.
And has like millions of adherents. So there's like a ton of like branding power with the group that's been around longer. And there's like a ton of social proof with the group that is larger.
Right.
Now, obvious caveat, the Catholic Church has been responsible for, you know, all kinds of horrible atrocities.
Let's list all the atrocities.
But if you're like a person that's like, I would like to join a group, please. And there's a bunch of like new groups that were just, you know, popped into existence this year. And then there's like one that's been around for 1,000 years. One of those is a known quantity and the others aren't.
Right.
And like maybe the other one of them might be good, but one of them might be Heaven's Gate. And that might be bad for you.
The Heaven's Gate people didn't think it was bad.
Fair. But if you're someone who is wanting to join something.
Not like, simply to die.
Not simply to die. You know, if you don't already have those Heaven's Gatey beliefs, you might not want to join.
Correct.
Heaven's
Gate. Yeah.
So I thought that was like a pretty good point that I'm like, I don't know if I'd ever really thought about that on the show. Like we sort of like have this criteria about like, is it niche? And that sort of, you know, separates whether it's a cult or a religion in our, you know, little show parlance.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's like an irrational thing to do.
No.
Or an irrational way to think that like people have reasons for belonging or viewing religions in a certain way versus new religious movements.
And it's because of what your mom and dad made you do on a Sunday morning.
Exactly. So yeah, the comments on LessWrong really do seem to support the notion that these guys are trying to be rational and fight their biases. We talked about that already.
That's really good.
The comments were thoughtful and measured. That's another part that I was like, oh man, I like them.
That's fantastic.
They really like thinking fast and slow.
The book, or they like doing that?
They like thinking fast, and then they like thinking slow, and then they like thinking fast again. No, they like the book by Daniel Kahneman. That's like one of their things that they like reference a lot, and that's like one of the things that. So you were asking me a little bit ago, like, well, what does Elliot like? What did he read?
So he read Thinking Fast and Slow.
So one of the things is Thinking Fast. and Slow.
Every man in my life has read Thinking Fast and Slow.
They're like into the pop psychology type stuff.
How do they feel about Malcolm Gladwell? I
don't know.
I really want to know.
I would like to know that as well. I think I have read the words tipping point on the site.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that they necessarily like Malcolm Gladwell.
That is true.
Tipping point is a thing other than just the title of his book. But Thinking Fast and Slow for you guys is just a book written by a experimental psychologist. Based on his research, we sort of have like two modes of thinking. There's like the fast, like low resource, low energy kind of thinking. And that's sort of like our like snap intuition, right? Like that's your first thought. And that's like what's in control most of the time. Like most of the time you're not, even though it may feel that way, you're not actually sitting like making a decision every second of your life. Most of the time you're like kind of on autopilot. In Thinking Fast and Slow, they call the first one System 1. They call the second one System 2. So the fast part is System 1, the slow part is System 2. And the slow part is your executive function where you're actually sitting down, focusing on a problem and trying to make a logical decision on it. And that part is like very resource intensive. So like that's why most of the time you're doing the intuitive sort of snap thinking that's like, you know, 80-20. It's like probably going to be right most of the time. And then the second part is more for like, I need to actually look at this. And then, you know, like people kind of like make some inferences maybe that they shouldn't sometimes. Like, oh, well, obviously the second one's better.
Right.
So we should try to do that as much as possible. And it's like, no, that's not what he was saying.
You shouldn't do it as much as possible. And I'm not saying ethically or morally or rationally, but like your brain, bad for brain.
Yeah, but I'm bringing it up here in the good list just because like I really liked that book. So like when I saw when I saw that was something that they liked too, I was like,
Thinking Fast and Slow is for people who read Malcolm Gladwell's Blink and then later on realized like, oh shit, that was an extremely poorly researched book. And like you can make the argument that Malcolm Gladwell is a hack. And so then you got your hands on Thinking Fast and Slow and you went, oh sweet. So all the things I learned in Blink are true, but they're more true now. That's what that book
Right. Talk about a fucking bias. Holy shit. And then finally on my good bad list here, they like debating fun philosophy, hypothetical type stuff.
That sounds like the best.
Like they're kind of like an online version of that dumb Ayn Rand club I had in college. Shout out to last season's objectivism episodes. where it's just like a bunch of nerds discussing like utilitarianism and how to think better.
Again, it's a fandom.
Speaking of objectivism, let's move from talking about the good to talking about the bad and ugly.
This is what I'm here for.
So objectivism is a good segue because the LessWrong community has a good amount of overlap with some of the same sort of like tropes that were also present in the objectivist community, as we have brought up.
Having sex with your young fans?
I didn't see anything about that.
Okay.
So that's not one of the overlaps, but one of the overlaps is the whole like amateur thing that has come up a couple times. Just like Ayn Rand and sort of the objectivists around her, they also like hate incumbent. Maybe hate's a strong word, but they don't care for incumbents in the field that they are themselves doing. And so
like, what do you mean?
Incumbents don't like them. So like they don't engage with,
like they don't read philosophy.
Yeah. So they don't like, they don't like they think that philosophers and like the field of philosophy is like, oh, kind of stupid and a waste of time. But then all they do is talk about philosophy without like realizing really that that's what they're doing. And so then, I mean, so like,
I have a hard time with that one.
Yeah. r/ask philosophy. So there's a Reddit community where it's like, you can ask a philosopher stuff, right? Like philosophers go on there and answer people's questions.
Hard time with that too.
I saw at least 2 posts of somebody being like, hey, I just encountered this site called LessWrong. And I was just wondering like what you guys think about it. They seem to talk about a lot of philosophical topics. Is it worth my time? And the answers are like not great. Let me see if I can actually find this. Yeah. So here, I won't read the whole Reddit post here because it's long, but somebody posts, should I read LessWrong wiki or not? And then says like, yeah, I recently discovered it because of Roko's Basilisk, actually.
Ew.
So like, what's going on there? Like, should I read it? Is it good? And then the first answer here says, I read through a bunch of it some years ago because I had heard some of my students mention it and wanted to see what the fuss was about. The main problems I could find were the following, and each one of these problems listed has a whole description, but I'm just going to read the bullet points. 1, reinventing the wheel. 2.
See, that's what happens when you don't engage with what... Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
That's what...
You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. Thank you, Kamala.
That is going to be the title of this episode because that honestly really hits the nail on the head for this. Bullet point number 2, contempt for philosophy.
Oh.
Bullet point number 3, errors. Bullet point number 4, cult-like atmosphere surrounding the author being Yudkowsky.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, like, yeah, there's this weird sort of reverence for his writings.
Right.
And then 5 biographical stories from the author all over the place. So like Eliezer, like he makes a lot of like, this happened to me statements, and it's usually just kind of cringe. And so this person says,
what, like everybody clapped type stuff?
Sort of. So like, here's a quote. It's like, I'm an intellectual maverick after all, because I work in machine learning.
I'm going to throw up. I'm sorry.
I told them I work in AI and their jaws hit the floor. People often say they're afraid of me because I work in AI.
I'm speechless. See, this is what I mean.
Yeah, I know.
would not get along with this person.
I know.
I can't handle that.
You can't handle the truth.
Kind of like self-perception.
Yeah.
I find very grating.
Yeah, I think most people do. Another good quote I read about them, and this is actually like kind of quoted in several places when people are critiquing LessWrong, is somebody said in an article, the good bits aren't original and the original bits aren't good. So they dismiss academics and philosophers, reinvent a wheel, and then like claim they discover something. And when I say they, referring to LessWrong, but like in this case, I'm mostly talking about Eliezer and his sequences.
I really, see, this is the kind of stuff. Yeah, you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree, Eliezer.
Yeah. And then if somebody takes a philosophy course, they kind of have to like, I saw this as well on another Reddit post, like they kind of have to like unlearn this like weird framework of vocab and mishmash and then like correct course onto like, you know, what the current thinking and like the way that philosophers talk about these problems.
And there's nothing wrong with
already exists.
Being original and having original thoughts. So the problem is when you don't and say you do.
Yeah, the good bits are not original and the original bits are not good. My next bad con whatever bullet is just the jargon, which we've already talked about at length. So I'll just note it under the bad column here, but it also reminds me a little bit of objectivism. So like objectivism has like vocabulary tropes like A is A and like don't be an Ellsworth too. Like they have their own sort of like in-group language as well. Like not in like as extensive a manner, but it just kind of reminded me of that too, where you won't know what somebody is talking about unless like you're both already in the know. It's more of like a signaling thing.
Right.
Both objectivism and LessWrong have their foundational texts. On LessWrong, you should read the sequences to become familiar with their ideology. In objectivism, you should read Atlas Shrugged. Now, to be fair, I read several posts on LessWrong where members are discussing the exact problem of, hey, if somebody asks me what LessWrong is, like you can't really direct them to a collection of essays that will take them a week to read.
Right, right.
There has to be some better way of summarizing the community and its goals. Like, so there's definitely people on the site that are aware of that. So they've created some summaries like this in the form of increasingly short additional blog posts. One person summarized it in a post that's like 2,200 words. Another one gets all the way down to 1,600 words. And then finally I read one that was like, it's just like a 7-minute read and comes complete with a 1-sentence definition of the rationalist movement, which the rationalist movement is considered to have sprung from. It's like sort of synonymous with LessWrong, or it was when LessWrong was more active. Now it's its own thing.
Right.
Would you like to hear the 1-sentence definition?
Yes, please.
Good, because I was going to say it anyway. All right, so this definition is provided by a user named Melavora on LessWrong, and it goes as follows. Rationalism is the philosophy of pragmatism, which is the practical application of the scientific method, experiment and evidence, as well as logical thought and any awareness of limitations and uncertainty to achieving our goals. So it's the philosophy of pragmatism, which is all that, with a particular focus on Bayesian statistics and cognitive biases. End quote.
I won't lie. I don't understand.
They like science, they like to think about biases, and they like to think in terms of like probability and statistics.
Got it. Thank you.
Like objectivists, they're sort of like head over heels in love with logic and rationality. Now, counterpoint to this, like I think they correctly, so there's like a bias that they point out, like a fallacy, is to pit logic against emotion, which I don't get that sort of like sense from objectivism. Like I think they're like, yeah, it's emotion sucks.
Right, right.
Whereas on LessWrong, the sense I got was more like, no, that's a false dichotomy.
Hey,
that
that's
we've
great,
created.
because that's a problem you see a lot, and
They even have a word for it called straw Vulcan.
I'm in love.
So it's like straw man argument, except like the straw man is like, look at that dumb Vulcan, because all he uses is logic, and that means that he can't ever feel emotion, and that gets him into trouble. And so they're like, no, it's like a false dichotomy. Like emotion is also like a thing and is like a valid way to help us come to decisions, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I want to give them credit there. Like objectivists, they both have a tendency to be overconfident in conclusions because they think it comes from a rational place. And this is mostly manifest when they strike out into areas other than just talking about shit like confirmation bias.
Right.
Just like with Ayn Rand, when she's talking about metaphysics and epistemology, it's mostly okay. But then when she extrapolates that out to like, and therefore the only author you should enjoy, rationally speaking, is Victor Hugo. Oh,
she had a problem too with the like, I have invented an idea.
Oh, totally.
And it was already an existing idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was why that was the first thing I brought up, is because like,
yeah,
that's very objectivist, like that, like, I have disdain for these things. I am going to do this thing though, and reinvent the wheel in like a sloppier way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like that extrapolation into those other fields is where it gets weird, right? Now, I see a lot less of that on LessWrong than I do in objectivism. They wouldn't say like, you can rationally only enjoy this type of music.
God bless Ayn Rand. What a piece of shit. Jesus Christ.
I know. Like, talk about confident, you know? Like, holy shit. So they're not quite that crazy, but I still see a little bit of that. And then, like, on the other end of the, like, this isn't in our wheelhouse spectrum, they steer clear of politics to a fault. So we mentioned the jargon phrase, politics is the mind killer.
Right. I want to know what that means.
So what that means is basically like...
Because I want to spoiler you on something.
Oh, no.
I don't think you can...
You already know the results of the election?
I do. I don't think you can avoid politics is the thing. I think you can avoid talking about like electoral politics, but you can't actually avoid politics. Sorry, say what you were going to say.
No, that's not a spoiler. That's a critique I have also read about the LessWrong community.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so they say politics is the mind killer because like when you get into a political mindset, you have so much emotional investment and also like you're getting into that thing where like identity comes into it.
There's a lot of identity stuff there. It makes it hard. Yeah.
It makes it really hard to be rational about something and like say I could be wrong about this because like it attacks some fundamental thing. And that's like well researched.
Yeah.
So that's true. But then they like, because they think they're like neutrally divorced from politics, they have a little bit of like a blind spot in the both sides-isms, which we kind of talked about earlier. Just getting back to that, this has boiled over like once or twice. And in fact, there's a site, or there was a site, it's now defunct, which is good. But there's a site that was called More Right, which is a great name. And it was founded by a bunch of LessWrongers that wanted to be like more openly racist and such with their, with their commentary. And so like they made their own little play for it.
Okay, good. Bye.
Yeah, no, so actually, yeah.
That's so that's like self-policing working out real good. I saw
comments that were almost exactly what you're saying right now. Like to their credit, there was like a post I read on LessWrong about this schism, and like a lot of the comments on the post were like, I really hope that like the assholes self-select out of our community now and like it's like cleaned up in here.
That style of like policing, quote unquote, your community, that can work, especially for these smaller communities like you're talking about. I think it's also similar to how we talked about with empty spaces, like especially when we talked about with Nicole in the bonus episode, talking about like, okay, well, what happens when like shit ass people come into your forum and start being shit ass.
And especially with empty spaces, because it's like so diffuse. Like there's not like a site with a guy with, it's like even harder.
I think where we ended up with that was that essentially because of the way this community functions, the people that come in that are saying like, because again, it was a very queer community, etc. The people that are coming in and saying like dumbass, racist, horrible shit are simply not going to get the attention, the eyes. They're going to essentially be siloed out of the community because no one's going to be paying it any attention. And that kind of seems similar to what happened
that's
here,
sort
where
of
like
what happened
the
here.
community siloed. There was a siloing effect happening.
Yeah, I think that happened here. I just think that it happened slower than in a place like Empty Spaces.
And I don't know if Empty Spaces is still doing okay with this. I have not checked on that particular thing in the last year, but that's how it was at the time.
Yeah, I think the slowness is because like these guys are really into engaging in good faith, like we talked about earlier, right? So like they're really like, it's going to take longer to be like, okay, I'm not talking to this guy. Like he just keeps up bringing up the bell curve, and I'm sick of it.
Yeah, it's like how long do you engage in good faith when the when the engaging in good faith is actually
it's like part of your DNA,
making your community less safe,
right?
Because if people are coming in being like bell curve, bell curve, bell curve, then like that's not a safe community for the people that the bell curve targets.
Yeah, so that's related to the whole like politics is the mind killer thing too, because like they feel like they're neutral. They don't want to talk about politics. So when somebody does talk about politics, there's like the la, this isn't happening until eventually like somebody's racist enough that you have to be like, oh, we're not talking to this guy.
Right.
And then also, as you pointed out, you can't really avoid politics. You can avoid electoral politics, but you can't avoid like the political realities of like the different power structures that are in our world. You just kind of can't. I think some LessWrongers, I've definitely saw, and I think this includes Eliezer actually, where he basically says like, look, when we say politics is the mind killer, we just mean like, let's not bring it into debates about XYZ because it's going to bias us. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't bring our rational thinking community, blah, 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 to bear on politics outside of this site. So again, like Eliezer said that. Yeah. So
it sounds like they've
good or bad, who's to say?
They've thought about a lot of this stuff, and like I'm coming in with the bias of like, they don't want to talk about politics, and it's not that they're just coming to it like superficially. And I think that that's something that I'm also grappling with these days, as trying to check some of my biases and failing in a lot of ways.
It's hard, dude.
Have I said this before on the show of like, it's probably better to assume that the person you're engaging with a different opinion than you
We've definitely talked about that in real life.
Has the same amount of information. Like it is very possible for somebody to have reached a different conclusion than you with the same amount of
information.
information. And not everybody does have the same amount of information. And you're probably going to talk to somebody who hasn't read the sequences.
And you can know.
You can never know.
Because we are all islands inside our own little brains. We don't know what information people have up there.
And also, it does seem like a cognitive bias to me to always jump to the conclusion of that person thinks the right wing take on this and I think the left wing, and that means they haven't done enough reading. That means they haven't learned. That means that they don't know. That means they're voting against their own interests. That means that they're dumb. That means that they're less smart.
Almost always that it means there's like some sort of like premises that you're not thinking of. Like there's probably something in that person's head that you just don't know.
Right. They don't necessarily have quote
the same
unquote
information.
less information than you.
Exactly.
They just have reached a different conclusion.
Right. So speaking of like going outside the LessWrong club, there's like a whole hater community dedicated to it on Reddit called Sneer Club.
Oh, is that what Sneer Club is?
That's what Sneer Club is. It's like a LessWrong hating community where just like people discuss the dumbass stuff that happens with LessWrong.
I have a lot of feelings about hater communities.
I think don't quote me on this, but I think Sneer Club comes from Eliezer talking about hater communities and saying like, well, people will form like a Sneer Club just to hate you. And then I think that's where they came up with the name Sneer Club.
Okay, I like that.
Which is funny. And lots of the vitriol on Sneer Club is devoted to Eliezer in particular. So like his insanely like smug arrogance, as it turns out, has like rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
I wonder why.
And sort of like you know how like you always only hear about the really crazy stuff people say and you never hear about the reasonable stuff. You know, like the crazier takes rise to the surface then that's the thing that goes viral. That's kind of present in the Sneer Club too, where it's like, okay, yeah, you're talking about this is like an insane thing that this person said, but for every insane thing, there's also like 10 normal things that are just not fun to sneer about.
Right.
I'm also speaking a bit in the past here because Sneer Club is currently in stasis thanks to Reddit shenanigans.
Like cryostasis?
It's frozen in time. Thanks to Reddit. So, you know, like there's like the whole Reddit controversy, like way outside the scope here. But anyway, so they basically like put a pause on it. Like you can still read it. You just can't post there.
Wait, the mods put a pause or the Reddit put a pause?
The mods put a pause based on the actions of Reddit.
Got it.
But this is also somewhat past tense thanks to the fact that LessWrong is not nearly as active as it once was. So the Roko's Basilisk, and this is not part of the like pro-con thing, but the Roko's Basilisk incident alienated and drove away a chunk of users.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
And then other incidents like Yudkowskyisms and associations over the years eventually made it so that the rationalist community refers to themselves now as an online diaspora, the Rationalists diaspora, because they don't really feel like they have a home. Kind of like what LessWrong was. Like that was kind of their home. And now it's kind of like, well, we can't really go there. Although a large chunk of them apparently went to another website called Slate Codex, which to my understanding is a bit of like a LessWrong 2.0.
I like that name.
I know. I was like, wait, what the hell does that? I don't actually know what that means since this is not the episode about that. But that's sort of my pro and con list. And then there's like things that, I don't know, people don't like, but I think are kind of good, like either good or like, why don't you like this? This is just them like pontificating. So I think that there's I've read stuff where it's like, they are too rational and don't think that intuition or emotion are good things to make decisions. Like I've seen that critique and I'm like, no, if you actually read what they're saying, I don't think that's the case. And then like, you know, they do weird thought experiments that sometimes get weaponized against them. One of the things we talked about in our previous episode on Roko's Basilisk, and we will probably talk about again in a future episode here, is the mote of dust thing.
I don't want to talk about the mote of dust thing because it's going to tear our marriage apart.
It is going to tear our marriage apart. I think that we should have a discussion about it on microphone. But for right now, and I know this is going to be really tough to compartmentalize, but for right now, I'm just going to say that I'll explain what it is. So there's this thought experiment of like, if you had X number of people where X is like a number so large that it makes the number of atoms in the universe look like nothing, get a mote of dust in their eye, would you torture someone for 50 years, one person, to make that not happen? So it's basically like the trolley problem on steroids.
No,
right? It's a utilitarian thing.
I'm going to go insane.
It's a utilitarian thing. You can sit there and go insane because we don't have time to get into it right now. But that's don't shoot the messenger. That's what it is. And it does make people insane. And then they talk about it in terms of like, can you believe that they think that you should do this? Like, that's so abominable. But actually, I've read the posts.
You dare
it's
actually.
Just them talking about it is like a thought experiment.
That's dumb. If people are like getting mad at them for talking about it or like sneering at them for talking about the thought experiment, that's silly to me.
What else would it be?
I'm just saying that if you come to the conclusion that's different than my conclusion, you're bad and wrong.
Right. We are not biased here.
I'm not saying you shouldn't talk about it. I'm just saying that if you come to the wrong conclusion, you're bad and wrong.
Yeah, I know how you feel, Kayla. Anyway, after all that, good, bad, whatever, bottom line, I don't really know what to think. There were definitely a few days of me reading posts on LessWrong where I was like, I don't really understand what the problem is. These guys seem pretty cool to me. Like, they're kind of my kind of nerds, like the way they like to think about thinking and fight their biases. But then I read some of the receipts that Sneer Club had, and I'm like, oh my God, these guys are idiots.
I think really the big problem for me is simply Eliezer Yudkowsky.
I think so too.
I think that
a lot of the weird like guru worship of him.
That's really the problem that, and it's like problem is such a nebulous word, but that is a red flag that comes up for me in this community, and like any community that would have like a de facto leader like this, where no one's saying like, oh, he's infallible, but there is kind of that like undercurrent or like things being inferred and implied. And then also simply the way that he talks about himself and the authority with which he makes certain statements.
What they would say, which I don't know if I don't think I agree with this, but I think it's a valid counterpoint. They would say, well, just because something has like the tropes and trappings of X doesn't make it X.
We're not a pyramid scheme because a pyramid scheme is illegal.
So they kind of say that, like, yeah, I mean, just because, I hold this man in high regard doesn't mean I'm like hero worshiping him or whatever.
You can hold a man in high regard.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that man doesn't hold himself to a level that a man shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the thing that sticks in my craw here. You know what? They talked about like breaking things down into chunks. And like the good chunk is like all the stuff that we've talked about of like having these conversations.
I think that's a wise idea.
That chunk over here. And then the chunk of like the danger of the charismatic leader stuff. Like let's put that chunk over there in the bad. Yeah.
Because it kind of feels like, and I didn't read this on their site, so I'm just going to go ahead and like coin it right now because I'm a genius.
Because you've independently come to this conclusion.
I've independently come to a conclusion that nobody has ever thought before.
Out of the coconut tree.
I did. You know what, Kayla? I did fall out of the coconut tree. Okay. Kamala can't tell me what to do. I think there's also like an unhappy death spiral where there's like this guy said some stupid shit. Look at this other stupid shit.
Yep.
And then you're like, everything about this place is bad. Clearly they're a bad group. Obviously they're a cult.
Right.
And I think that that's its own bias too.
They get cult accusations levied against them?
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
One of I think the first, when you Google search
is
LessWrong.
Is LessWrong a cult?
The first thing it'll autocomplete is LessWrong. And the second thing it'll autocomplete is LessWrong space cult.
Ah, okay.
And certainly like Sneer Club obviously says that.
Okay.
Which I have a little bit about here too, which is kind of what you just said, like hater communities. Like
I got a problem.
They have an irritating vibe too. Like why are they obsessed with the wrong things on LessWrong?
I think there's just,
But counterpoint, there is an answer to that. I think Sneer Club is also like a lot of burned LessWrongers.
And you know what? People that got burned
kind of need to work out their feelings of disappointment and betrayal.
They deserve to have a space too.
But it's just like, as an outsider trying to make some sort of judgment call about this community, it's like, it's impossible.
Right.
I mean, that's part of probably why the rationalists feel like they're part of a diaspora.
Right.
I have a few quotes here too, just to like confuse us further. So here's one good quote I liked from an article. I was trying to get a sense of how LessWrong felt about their critics. And I really liked this quote. This guy almost reached out to talk to him, and I might still.
Is it, I don't think about you at all?
No, it's not that cool. They say, quote, "From what I can tell, the anti-rationalist, anti-transhumanist crowd does not seem interested in object-level arguments about AI existential safety at this time. They are analyzing the situation purely from a social perspective. So, what do? Do we get mad at them? What is the rational thing to do? I think the answer is understanding and kindness." End quote.
I like that.
And I'm like, dude, yeah,
it's
man.
Better than me.
And then like further down that article, that person was like, here's some like letters I wrote to these people that don't like us and say like, I totally understand why you might not like us. And I support you even though I disagree with you. Like, it was really good.
Yeah.
And then like even Eliezer has his own good quotes. Quote, once upon a time, I tried to tell my mother about the problem of expert calibration, saying, so when an expert says they're 99% confident, it actually only happens about 70% of the time. I don't know where he got these numbers, but
made up.
They're probably made up. The expert calibration problem is like an expert, even though they're an expert, they're going to be overconfident about how likely whatever they're saying is to happen. So then there was a pause as suddenly, and this is Eliezer talking now. There was a pause as suddenly I realized I was talking to my mother, and I hastily added, of course, you've got to make sure that you apply that skepticism even-handedly, including to yourself, rather than just using it to argue against anything you disagree with, ... And then he goes on to talk about like how it can actually be dangerous even to like know these things about cognitive biases. If you know the cognitive biases, you can still... There's like this period where you're like, if you don't recognize that it's also talking about you, then like you're liable to just use it as like, oh, that's a bias that person's using. Therefore, I'm right.
Yep.
I think that's a great insight.
Yep.
Another quote. This is really short, but just not every change is an improvement, but every improvement is a change.
It's cute. I like that.
He also has a whole Medium article, and this will be the last one, the quote I talk about. It's not really a quote, I guess, but he has a whole Medium article called hashtag reboot the police. And this is just to challenge your hatred of him.
I want to kill him. I'm sorry.
I know. Even with that, he still has to use the like Silicon Valley words.
Just turn it off and on again.
It's a long article,
I think
but I'll read you
off and then not on again is the thing.
I mean, it is kind of like a turn it off and on again. That kind of summarizes it.
I know, and I'm saying that's
no,
like,
I know.
Yeah.
I know. He does. So like in this article, he talks about like, well, this is sort of like different from abolish the police, but
right.
Like there seems to be a lot of appetite for that.
We want to make sure that there's people with sticks and guns that have government power that can kill you.
Okay, the laws do need to be enforced. And I say this as a hater of the police, but like laws do need to be enforced. But here, let me read you some of the bullet points from this. 1, completely disentangle punition from revenue, including outlawing civil forfeiture.
Hell yeah.
2, delegalize police unions.
Oh, fuck yeah.
3,
hell
require
yeah, dude.
body cams with teeth.
What does that mean? Like vagina dentata?
The body, yeah, so the body cam will actually have some teeth attached to it.
It'll bite you if
like
you...
a little necklace.
Cool.
4, nationwide zero tolerance policy for death of unarmed persons caused by law enforcement. 5, demilitarize city and county police and most state police.
Be nice.
6, abolish qualified immunity.
Oh, that'd be nice.
7,
oh my God.
Separate oversight from policing. 8, separate investigation from policing. And he goes on, there's more.
And
there's a shit ton.
The best part about all of that is that he came to all those conclusions himself.
There's 23 points.
All of those conclusions weren't like already existing like philosophy and rhetoric in the abolitionist movement that has extremely lengthy roots. He came to this all by himself. All by himself.
I can't look, the generous read here, because he does talk about like, yeah, there seems to be like a lot of appetite for these types of things. So I'm just kind of like collating. The generous read here is that he actually did engage with that and is sort of like
that's nice.
Collating his own version of it.
I was mostly just being a bitch.
Definitely. I mean, it definitely makes sense to like have that as your initial assumption about the guy. I more read that though.
There's a lot of good stuff there. And also I'm just going to fall back on you exist within the context of all you live and what came before you.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be in the show notes.
Sorry.
No, so the reason I bring it up though is to like sort of challenge like this guy's just a dickhead.
Right,
like
right.
It's hard.
Yeah.
But then he has bad quotes too.
Yes, he does.
So he has like to worship a sacred mystery was just to worship your own ignorance. That's a quote I read of his. And so he kind of thinks that like a sacred, I think that might be from the Harry Potter thing. But basically like that like mystery is just ignorance in a different form, and like mysteries exist to be like uncovered and known. And so he doesn't have like a good view of like the value of mystery as like a sacred mystery, which I could not disagree with more.
You're dumb if you follow a religious faith?
I mean, well, there's definitely that, but I would even say like that goes beyond just like you're dumb if you're religious. I think that is like sacred mysteries aren't actually like valuable whether they're religious or not.
I want to know how he feels about the Book of Job then. I really want to know. I want to know.
He probably has a very definitive answer, to be honest, that he's like super overconfident about. There's another quote here that I don't care for, which is, the purpose of doubt is to annihilate some particular belief. So basically, like, he sees doubt as like entirely changed to like a particular belief. Like, I have doubt in this belief, and either the belief stands and like the doubt is resolved, or it doesn't stand and the doubt annihilates that belief as it was born to do. So like, there's always this like pull of like, doubt exists to destroy this thing, and either it does or doesn't, and then goes away. And this is like a little pedantic, but I've read other people that critique this in the same way. Like, sometimes doubt is just a thing that like you have to kind of like continuously hold on to.
Yeah.
And I think that comes into like even like the very core of LessWrong itself. Like, you kind of always have to doubt your own cognitive processes, your own decision making, because if you don't,
it's kind of like baked into the scientific method.
Right. So I don't see like, and I think a lot of people don't see doubt as like a moment in time where like it needs to either get resolved or not. Some doubts are like just kind of like things that you kind of have to carry with you for safety's sake.
That does feel very Ayn Randy to me in a way.
Totally.
Like, we should play a game. Whose quote is it?
That's a really good idea. I think there's another quote that you mentioned. Did you mention in our cryonics episodes? I know you wanted to talk about, like, waiting for me to say it
Chomping
today.
at the microphone.
Chomping at the bit. Do you want to say what it is?
It's not a quote. I mean, I can pull some quotes. It's not a quote, but it's just some of the stuff that I came across in like visiting LessWrong, specifically on their cryonics topic. So obviously, Eliezer Yudkowsky is very pro cryonics and is signed up to be cryopreserved, and I believe his whole family is signed up to be cryopreserved. Which, like, great, cool, awesome. Like, I want more pro cryonics people out there in the world with platforms, because I don't know, man. We had multiple episodes about this, but I'm just like, just give us more options of what to do with my corpse after I die. Mr. Yudkowsky has come to a specific conclusion about cryonics, and that is, if you don't sign up your kids for cryonics, then you are a lousy parent. This is from an essay written in 2010, so very old. This may not be this person's stance anymore. This is from an article written called Normal Cryonics. And it's when Eliezer Yudkowsky attended a cryonics gathering that was specifically about getting young people signed up for cryonics and how he felt finally.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's, there's a lot of motivated reasoning going on there, right?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It was for young people who signed up for cryonics to meet older people who signed up for cryonics. Kind of like this meeting of the minds.
Oh, that's okay. That's an interesting summit.
And this essay kind of ended up being about how he finally felt sane for a moment because he was surrounded by parents who were signing their kids up for cryonics as like a matter of default, and like how he feels so insane and abnormal in the regular world where people just have like, kids that die. And this is coming from a place of, I believe Eliezer Yudkowsky had a younger brother who died as a child and was not cryopreserved and is therefore simply lost. There is no hope of maybe one day his brother coming back, which is a tough thing to deal with. But the conclusions drawn in this article are things like, I am a hero. Like, that's a quote from here. It's
a quote. I am a hero.
And it's specifically written like this. I am a hero.
Oh man. Like, that's so Eliezer. Look,
and he's a hero because he's signed up for, I got more to say. Hold on. And the reason why why this one stuck in my craw, and I don't want to say it's like dumb or bad or whatever. The reason why it stuck in my craw is because it's only having half a conversation. If you are internet philosopher and this is like your whole thing, and you're coming to the conclusion of, if you don't cryonically preserve your kids, if you don't sign your kids up for cryonics, you're a lousy parent because they could die and then they're dead and you have failed them as a parent because you have not signed them up for the thing that could preserve their life. And then you're not engaging in a conversation of, is it ethical to have children at all? You're only having half the conversation. If you're a lousy parent because
which I am, by the way.
Absolutely. If you're a lousy parent because you don't sign your kid up for cryonics, I want to have the rest of the conversation then of, how are you not a lousy parent for having kids at all? You're creating an entity that did not have a say in it before it happened, because that's impossible, who is now essentially doomed to a life of entropy. I want to have the rest of that conversation. And I'm obviously biased coming, not in this article.
Just not
he
in
doesn't.
that article, yeah.
I'm also biased coming into this because I am somebody who has a dead child that was not signed up for cryonics, and they are dead and do not have any chance of being cryopreserved and coming back.
We don't really have a chance.
Yeah, I'm just saying. And I just found this article so off-putting and coming from a place of like, this is an authoritative statement, and like also very dangerous in a lot of ways, and just like so judgmental in the like, if you don't do this thing that I have decreed as good, you are bad. Yeah. You are. And he goes into this whole thing of like, I've been afraid to say it, and I haven't said it for so long, and I'm finally saying it.
This is exactly why people don't like him, is because he presents things in this manner that you're discussing.
Yeah.
I will say that having the context of where this quote was presented does take the edge off for me a little bit.
Right.
Because he's talking to people that have done this, and so like yeah, you're the good, like the converse of that is you guys are good parents. Like you can kind of read it as like he's talking to the people that are the good ones, so he can say the other ones are bad ones. That being said, that caveat aside, I agree with obviously with everything you've said, and yes, that is part of what makes him rub people the wrong way. So now that you and everyone listening is hopefully as confused and disoriented as I am about who to root for here, next time on Culture Just Weird, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the distinctive properties of the modern rationalism community. I know it was a little strange to put the like, how do I feel about this episode before we talk about all the rest of the details, but I really wanted to move that discussion closer to the forefront because the uncertainty and mental flip-flopping was like such a core part of my research experience. And like I still, as we've talked about, still can't really figure out who to be versus here. But that's okay. There's still plenty to talk about as we continue to strive to be incrementally less wrong about less wrong. Until next week, this is Chris.
This is Kayla.
And this has been Cult or
Just Wrong.
Just Confused.